I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning, Karan Watson. Karan is the Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Texas A&M University. She's been there in this position since 2009. She was previously Dean of Faculties and Associate Provost. Before assuming the position of Dean of Faculties and Associate Provost, she was the Associate Dean in the Dwight Look College of Engineering. Joined the faculty of Texas A&M in 1983 and is currently a Regents Professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. She was Interim Vice President and Associate Provost for Diversity from November 2005 to September 2006, a role that she again held from December 2008 until July 2009. And I'll digress here a minute. I don't know how many of you were attending the ASWE conference when Karan was asked to step in for a speaker who didn't show up. And after the bio was introduced as the interim this and the interim that, and she got up there and said, "I just hope you consider me your interim speaker for today." Dr. Watson is a fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers and the American Society for Engineering Education. Her awards and recognitions include the U.S. President's Award for Mentoring Minorities and Women in Science and Technology, the American Association for the Advancement of Science Mentoring Award, the IEEE International Undergraduate Teaching Award, College of Engineering Crawford Teaching Award, and 2 university-level Distinguished Achievement Awards from the Texas A&M Association of Former Students, one in student relations and one in administration. She's chaired more than 34 doctoral students and more than 60 master's degree students. She served as a senior fellow of the National Academy of Engineering Center for the Advancement of Scholarship in Engineering Education. And since 1991, she has served as an accreditation evaluator and commissioner and is currently the president of ABET. Please help me welcome Karan Watson.
This is the energy check for Texas A&M. Howdy. Howdy. Hey, that's surprising. That usually doesn't work in D.C. So they didn't tell me what to talk about because they knew it wouldn't help contain where I might go. And they also knew that I typically plan the talk after I've seen what the conference is talking about. And that's why I use these cards, because I have a deck and I shuffle in what might be important today. So what I say might be important, might not. If you've ever read Change magazine or Fast magazine, both of them had an article about 2 or 3 years ago. And the article was about leadership. I have lots of articles about leadership, so I challenge you to find this particular article. But one of the things it talked about is changing your way of thinking as you try to take on bigger and bigger leadership roles. Notice I didn't say higher and higher. I said bigger and bigger leadership roles, because you can be in a position with no title and have an incredibly big leadership role to perform. But one of the things that the article said about thinking is that sometimes the most successful people at certain levels of leadership are incredibly tactical. They are the people that understand the tactics and get them done. So we call on them because they are very good at making the plan, figuring out the tactics, and getting it done. But as you have a bigger and bigger leadership role, you have to be a lot more strategic in your thinking. And leaders who think strategically regularly, these articles said, are rare. Because too often what has got us into the leadership role is how tactical we are. How much we can talk about this particular activity, how you will get it done, how it will work, or how it won't work. So I will start by challenging you that what Norman and all of the leaders are asking us to do is shift our own thinking wherever we are up a level. They're asking us not to think about what the barriers are. We did that. We needed to do that. We listed a lot of barriers yesterday. That's not the point. The point is surmounting the barriers. And yes, You can start by thinking tactically how you would do it in your group, but we're thinking about changing the nation and the profession. And we do not need tactical thinking. We need strategic thinking on how not only is this likely to be influential, it may not be tactically precise for what you need to do on your campus or in your program, but it's going to be strategic. For example, when Berkeley does something, it has a strategic impact on my campus. Okay? We may not do what Berkeley does, but it matters. On the other hand, when a community college does something, we may need to know what they're doing, but we won't pay attention unless there's a strategy. How do you get Texas A&M's attention to pay attention to this very good idea that is happening here? That's the kind of strategic thinking, or one aspect of that we need. So I'm going to start by saying to you, a quote from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Diversity is excellence, and it can't be an act. It has to be a habit at each one of our organizations. It can't be something we talk about twice a month, or if we're not quite as fortunate that, once a year. It has to be a habit. Organizational culture, say some, is defined by the daily conversations we have. We shouldn't have to have a special forum, special conference to talk about diversity. It should be important enough that it is a routine part of the conversation. A dean, a provost shouldn't say, yeah, but what was the diversity of the enrollment? It should be such a habit that every department head knows they have to think about that. That faculty should look in their class and they should think about, did my A's, B's, and C's have any pattern in them that makes me wonder if I was not tuned or was not welcoming or encouraging to certain identities more than the other? Has to be a habit. It's not up to the president to remind people every day, although I hope presidents and provosts have it as their habit as well. But if it's not integrated down to a level where it is a habit for everybody, then it's not real. It's a side thought. Our real mission is A, B, and C, and that defines excellence, and oh yeah, don't forget diversity, okay? That's not the strategy that is going to work for us. So I'm going to mention a few books that I have read that help me, and hopefully they would help you a little bit think or read them. You don't have to agree with everything in their contents, but I think they can help us think strategically. So the first book I want to mention is really not about ethnic diversity. It's about women in STEM fields, but it's still a very good book to read. Virginia Valian's. This is not the book. This is a piece of paper with a cover. Okay, it's not this thin, so don't get excited, okay? Virginia Valian's book, Why So Slow? It talks about why is the progress in getting women in STEM fields been progressing so slow when we've been talking about it for such a long time. And it's a meta-analysis of a lot of different aspects and angles, from industry to academia, medicine to health, all kinds of fields and stuff like that. It's a meta-analysis of lots of different research that has gone on. If we were writing this about ethnic diversity in STEM fields, it would be why so very, very, very slow, okay? But I want to read for you an example in the book. It's not hers, it's a meta-analysis of a study that she pointed out in the book. A computer model of promotion practices at a hypothetical corporation convincingly demonstrated the cumulative effect of small-scale bias. This study was done by Martell, Lane, and Emeritus in 1996. This simulation created an organization with an 8-level hierarchy staffed at the bottom level by equal numbers of men and women. The model assumed that over time, a certain percentage of incumbents would be promoted from one level to the next. It also assumed a tiny bias in favor of promoting men, a bias accounting for only 1% of the variability in promotion. The researchers ran the simulation through a series of promotions. After many such series, the highest level of the hierarchy was 65% male. The model shows clearly that even minute disadvantages can have substantially long-term effects. And she goes on to say, Virginia Valian goes on to say, and a 1% bias vastly underestimates the disadvantage that women have in the corporations it was modeling. So let's think about PK through 12 and underrepresented minorities, and you're going to tell me they only have a 1% disadvantage in our nation today? The disproportionality of their presence in low socioeconomic status, the social capital from lack of advantage and opportunities their parents and grandparents had, the blatant and the subtle biases against them, you're telling me that's only 1%? Is there any wonder that we at the college level are looking at a situation where the pool for those students who are really ready to come into our institution are nowhere representative of their presence in the population? This subtle bias matters. So we have to make sure that we are not looking for blatant bigots. I mean, they are there. There's a few in Texas. I don't know if you've ever run into them, but they're there. Okay? But if we keep just looking for that, we have missed the problem. And the problem is the microaggressions, the subtleties. For African American female faculty, the problem is the microaggressions mount up, and they don't stop when they leave campus. They happen in the restaurants. They happen in the department stores. They happen all the time. And so it is not enough for us to say we took care of the bigots. But you know, the reality is, on most of our campuses, we're even silent when the bigots speak. So we have to be sure that we are as attentive to the subtlety and the microaggressions and don't look just for the big issues and problems, because it's often in the mounting subtleties that really wear people out. Now, another book that I particularly like, Mistakes Were Made, But Not by Me. Okay? One of the reasons why I like this book is it addresses these very topics. Why is it in human nature we can find everybody else's mistakes, but when I or my organization has clearly made a mistake, I have to work so hard to make sure you know it wasn't my fault? Okay? So the book talks about one of the problems is cognitive dissonance. Okay, I'm not a cognitive scientist, but I understand this concept. If I say something that you don't believe, or you heard it in a way that doesn't fit with what you believe, you have to resolve that issue. Drew Weston did a study, it's talked about in this book, and they were monitoring brain activity, and they found when people were faced with an idea or a concept that went against their beliefs or what they thought they knew, the reasoning part of the brain shut down. And the emotional part of the brain started to ramp up, peaking when the individual found a way to discount the concept they did not agree with, either by determining the person saying it was an idiot, ignoring it, deciding it was just false, or explaining it away. For example, African Americans aren't attending Texas A&M because they're not smart enough. I know that's not true. But I have a lot of colleagues who won't say it out loud. But you know that's how they immediately get to, well, the reason why the numbers are low is because of them. It's not us, it's them. And as soon as they have an explanation, whether there's no evidence at all to substantiate it, or whether what they have to do is pull one example up of a student that wasn't ready, they don't pull up all the examples of the white kids that weren't ready, but they pull up that one example in their head and it explains away the dissonance of we've done something wrong because they're not here. Then they can go on. There's also an aspect called confirmation bias, that we only utilize what confirms what we believe. So if you are challenging my belief and you don't know it, and you think you're making an intellectual challenge, so you present some evidence, you did this program, it worked really well, you presented the data, voila. Why have they not adopted it? You did not address their beliefs. You just threw data out, and what did they do with confirmation bias? That data didn't fit their beliefs, so it's not filed. It's gone. Their attitude toward you is filed, but the data you were presenting is not filed, okay? So we have to pay attention. You know, I got to be an associate dean for a while. That was a great fun job, and my assignments were undergraduate and graduate curriculum for 10,000 students and grievances and dismissals, and I ran the honors program. Really, they were great people who ran the honors program. The minority in engineering program and the women in engineering program. Everything but the honors program won national awards. And when I left to become dean of faculties, my predecessor, he knew we did not need minority programs. All they were for was to help underprepared students. What we needed was a better filter so underprepared students didn't get in. So he did away with the minority program. And then only to be fair, because somebody brought it to his attention, he did away with the women's program. So Texas A&M's College of Engineering, now I'm not going to claim that Texas A&M is the best in our percentage of diversity, but we were weird because the College of Engineering was leading in ethnic diversity for the entire university. And now we trail significantly. We have a new dean now, and we have a new person assigned to this office. If you know her, her name is Valerie Taylor. She's African American, and both of those programs are back. Okay? And they are moving rapidly. And again, I will tell you, Valerie knows, our dean, Kathy Banks, knows, and I know, that having those programs is not sufficient to change our college. But they are necessary until our college changes. And that is something that we haven't got enough people on the faculty to understand yet. So Valerie's job is not to make the person who runs minority in engineering convince the college that it's necessary. That's the dean's job, the associate dean's job, and as much as possible my job as provost, so that the minority in engineering program person can run an outstanding program for the students. Too often we put the MEP person in charge of changing the mind of all of the college. Unfair and inappropriate, because they're fighting for their life, for the funding that will keep them going all the time. They cannot be in charge of the change that is necessary in the college. And if you think the only change necessary in your college is a good MEP program, you're wrong. The goal of the dean and the associate dean should be to get to a point where we don't need an MEP program. And because the MEP program has been so great at running student programs, we will need them, but we won't need them to focus on minority programs. But we are nowhere near that at my institution. So, another book. This one is very political toward one set of thinking. If you voted for George W. Bush, you might not like this book, okay? But it is an important book to think about the concept. It's called Don't Think of an Elephant. Don't think of an elephant. How many of you succeeded? The point of this book is when the other side of an issue get to frame the issue, we have no choice and we lose our power. Okay? When I tell you not to think about an elephant, you have to think about an elephant. Recognize, and this book points out, that speaking truth to power won't do it. Some of you in this room think that's what it takes. I have told them, and they're not listening. This is the point of this. That's not sufficient. We have told them these programs work. We have told them here's the problem. We have told them here's why we should do this, and it's not working. So as was mentioned yesterday, stop it. Those strategies aren't going to do it. We have to come up with other strategies. We have to reframe. Because until you frame the idea that power, whatever power is, that power can work with, you're not going to cause a change. So let's think about that just a little bit. What does that mean when we talk about that? So some of you have heard me give this example before. Some of you know I have and dearly love my 1956 pickup truck. You don't have to be from Texas to have a pickup truck, but it helps. Okay. It's beautiful. It's plum. In College Station, they think it's maroon. It's not. It's plum. Okay? That's one of the original colors of a 1956 pickup truck. Has no rust. Probably runs as good as it did in 1960. Okay? It is a great truck. Now, if you come and tell me, that's an old truck, get rid of it. Not only am I not going to, I am offended. This is my baby. This is my truck. And I love it, as only a Texan would love their pickup truck. Okay? So don't tell me it's old, it's out of date. And if you frame the problem as, here's some of the issues with your truck. It's not very fuel efficient, is it? I don't go very far in it. I don't care. So every time you try to point out to me what's wrong with my truck, I'm just more and more offended by you who don't understand how hard I have worked to have this truck, to keep it running, to keep it beautiful. It's my truck. On the other hand, if you said, we're going to drive to California, let's take your truck, I would say, what is wrong with you? Okay? We are not going to California in my 1956 truck. It is not good for the truck, and it is not good for us. Okay? Has no AC. It gets terrible gas mileage. What are you thinking? Okay? Reframe. If it hasn't been working, then instead of thinking that they are idiots, understand that we have framed the issue wrong. And NAE and ASCE has pulled us together because of your experience and your expertise and said, help reframe, strategize. And let me start by saying that the question, why aren't they here, is the absolute wrong framing. It frames it on them. They're a problem. They're not here. You see, this problem is dead to begin with. It is not our problem. They have a problem. And the only solution is to fix them. And it's complicated. We got schools, we got parents, we got society. Wow, that's way beyond our capabilities. So it's too big for us. Why aren't we fair to all students? You say that to me, I'm like, oh, of course we're fair to all students. Prove it. Prove they're all motivated. I'm not asking to give grades away. I'm asking you to prove that you are equitable, you are fair, you are equally motivating, inspiring, helpful to students, no matter their background or their identity. Prove it, because I'm challenging that we're not fair to all students. That doesn't mean I want to take away the focus that part of the evidence has to explicitly look at ethnic identity. So I'm not saying, oh, mask this as if it's not diversity. It is diversity. But if we keep focusing the problem on why they are not here, we are going to keep failing, because we keep finding that the problem is them. And the programs that often that work are the programs that are going to fix them, not change us. And again, I want to emphasize, it does not mean I don't think that interventions to strengthen them until we change us aren't necessary. They are very important as a tactic on the way to a bigger strategy. And the bigger strategy is we have to have enough presence to make sure that we have changed us. And so the strategy is not about just getting a number. That's an artifact. The question is, are we truly respectful and fair and equitable in how we are producing the greatest engineers society has ever seen? And I challenge you to prove that we are right now, as a profession, as individual campuses, as programs. So, how are we going to make these changes? Fourth book, John Kotter's A Sense of Urgency. He talks in this book about why changes often fail. Incredibly, we found that over 70% of the situations, they did study corporations mostly, where substantial changes were clearly needed, either they were not fully launched, or the change efforts failed, or changes were achieved but over budget, late, and with great frustration. He goes on to say, if a sense of urgency is not high enough and complacency is not low enough, everything else becomes more difficult. The opposite of urgency is not only complacency, the opposite of a true sense of urgency is a misguided, false sense of urgency. True urgency focuses on critical issues, not agendas overstuffed with the important and the trivial. True urgency is driven by a deep determination to win, not anxiety about losing. Have we developed true urgency? I would point out to you, we have not. I have not found a dean of engineering that doesn't espouse, therefore, diversity. Have you? I bet if they espouse they're against diversity very vocally, they're not going to be dean very long. That doesn't mean they believe in it, but who's going to not say they're for diversity? So, what are we going to do? Well, I'm going to give you one example of a start that we have made in a much broader way at Texas A&M University. And again, I am not saying we are the poster children of good diversity outcomes, but we've re-strategized how we should do that. Now, one of the things we did is a lot of us read The Art of War, because we're good at that at Texas A&M. Reading, no, I'm just kidding. So, one of the parts of The Art of War that we focused on is a part where it tells a leader that you need to understand the terrain and situation that you're going to carry out this battle, this challenge. Some of the examples of terrain they talk about, or situations they talk about, I'm going to give you a few, but they have quite a few. One is that you're going in a light terrain for a light issue. This is not one of those, okay? In other words, you have to fix a little problem. We're missing this step. We're not doing that step well. That's all. We got to fix that. And the art of war says, get in and out. Get in there, do it, and get out. The people won't be real focused. Don't try to get them real focused. Just go in and fix it and get out. There's a thing called intersecting terrain. All the forces come to bear in this terrain. Several competing entities might end up in the same area at once. It says you got to make alliances in this terrain. You got to be ready to adapt. Heavy terrain, big battle, tough. You're going to have to go deep on this one. Convince everybody there's no return, no safe way back out. You go in on this one, you got to go all the way. And plunder everything on the way. Surrounded. You're in narrow grounds. There's only a few choices and you're surrounded. Surprise everybody and adapt very quickly. Now, one of our favorites, dying terrain. Be quick, win, and spontaneous is the only answer if they're about to kill you. Okay? Otherwise, just die and be done with it. So, we thought about it and we decided for our diversity plan on campus, we are in all of these terrains on some aspect, but overwhelmingly we are in intersecting terrain. It's not that people don't believe in and want diversity, it's that there's too many other issues that also have priority. So we are not going to win by thinking we're going to get everybody to focus on diversity alone. We have to couple diversity with all these other intersecting priorities. We have to mean it when we say diversity is the key to our excellence, not we're going to be excellent, oh yeah, and diverse. We have to get that alliance between our university's intent to be excellent and diversity totally aligned together, woven together, not one or the other, but they have to both come. So we have been working on that. We have used Edgar Sheen's idea that for an organizational culture, because when we talk about diversity, one of my toughest tasks was to get people to quit talking about how many 18-year-olds came to campus. That is not diversity. That is an artifact of a culture when you can see what the head counts are. And that artifact is important, but it is not the culture. Edgar Sheen talks about any organization has artifacts, processes, procedures, data that describe it. They have espoused values, and they have underlying assumptions. For example, we espouse we want diversity, but our enrollment of African Americans this year in the first time in college group was 3.5%. There's a problem here, right? There must be an assumption underlying what we're doing that we haven't articulated. Because in the state of Texas, if we wanted 12% African American, we could have it. But we're not willing to pay enough. We're not willing to not look at SATs enough. We're not willing to do a lot of other things that maybe appropriately don't trump our espoused value. So by looking at the artifacts and seeing where they don't align with your espoused values, you can often get to the root of the underlying assumptions, which I'm not saying are always wrong, but you at least need to be conscious of what the underlying assumptions are. So we made a diversity plan, and we rooted it with all kinds of people on campus, groups, deans, everything, and we put it into place in 2009. The diversity plan focuses primarily on three things: accountability, climate, and equity. We divided the campus into units. Every college is a unit. Every vice president is a unit, and the athletic director. We do not let the units compare themselves to each other. They have to compare themselves to peers. So the College of Engineering is not competing with the College of Education. It's competing with other colleges of engineering. Education used to talk about how much more diverse they were than engineering, but they're not more diverse than other colleges of education. We have the Vice President of Finance having to see regionally and nationally, is their staff as diverse as it should be? Everybody is looking at faculty, staff, and student diversity, not just one, but all of those diversities. So every year, they have to benchmark themselves, and the provost and the vice president of diversity have to agree with who they are benchmarking themselves against to show us how they're doing. Are we a national leader in diversity? And you have to benchmark yourself. Who are you trying to be as good at? Why aren't you trying to be as good as this school? Okay? So they have, and I have trouble when they benchmark themselves for promotion and tenure or salary comparisons against one group, but in diversity, they're not going to benchmark themselves against that same group. Okay? So we work on that. Climate. They have to do a climate study for their unit. Not a university climate study, we still do that. But the colleges, the divisions, they have to do a climate study for faculty, for staff, for students. And they have to do an equity study every year. It could be salaries. We've been doing faculty equity studies for years for tenure and tenure track faculty. 7 of my colleges this year for the first time are doing equity studies for salaries for non-tenure track faculty. That's harder. They are doing time to promotion studies, retention studies, these things, all of these things interrelate. Equity affects culture, presence affects culture, accountability, they all interrelate. So they have to prepare a report every year on their benchmarking accountability, on their climate, and on their equity. And when they present this report, it goes to a presidential council. Community leaders, campus leaders, faculty, staff, and students, few administrators, judge whether the unit is getting better and how much their progress compares to the other units. And we rank them. 1, 2, 3, 4. College of Vet Med was ranked #1 last year. Who'd have thunk? Okay? On working really hard on their diversity. Okay? Division of Finance is sucking right now. The athletic department is not doing as well as you would think, even though the athletes are very diverse. The staff is not. And so we're holding them accountable in all these dimensions. And they have to present to the president, the provost, and the council. We spend all day, one day, going through these 22 units presentations. Now, the first year, a bunch of associate deans presented. We're now going into year 4, and it is the deans that come to present. Clearly, they saw that the council wasn't that impressed when the dean didn't come. Now, I know what's happening is the day before the presentation, the dean is calling in the associate dean and say, what are we going to say? Okay? I don't care. At least they had to know it for that day. Okay? So they do their presentation, we rate them. Now, here's an important thing. I'm going to give a number here, and you're going to, oh, yeah, I wish we could do that. Remember, we have 50,000 students. Actually, we have 58,000 students. Okay, do a little math here. If for the year I used $20 for each student of what they pay, I have $1 million. We give $1 million every year to these units based on the results of their performance. Not each unit doesn't get $1 million, but we distribute $1 million. We weight them based on size. It's harder to turn a big ship sometimes than a small ship, and on how well they stacked up. And my units over the last several years have gotten anywhere from $250,000 to $50,000 to $8,000, depending on their size. Some of the units, usually around 40%, don't get any money in a given year. One unit was distraught with us because they got money one year and the next year they didn't get any money and they were doing better. And we had to tell them, but everybody else is doing better faster than you're doing better. Okay. I'm not saying this is a good plan for you. I'm saying we had to change the strategy. We were running camps, we were running intervention programs, we were running tutoring programs, we were running all those things. And a lot of people running those programs want me to spend $1 million on those programs. Some people want us to make the units account for, did they spend the money we gave them on these programs? But you see, I won't do that. Because strategically, that means that the units that didn't get money don't have to get better. If you only are getting money to run the programs that make you get better, then you are sunk. So I say it, keep insisting, no. You give us no accounting for how you spend this money. You compete next year, I hope you win. But this is your discretionary money in the college. Use it, or in the division. Use it like you need to. Run what you need to run with it. I'm not going to micromanage you, and I'm not going to let them. But we're going to judge you every single year on are you getting better in diversity. So these are examples that I hope, whether it's a campus example or I hope we're thinking about national and professional examples, that we need to think about what ups the bar, what makes us want to do this in a bigger way than we have been doing. So I probably far exceeded my time, but if you have time for a few questions, I am happy to try to answer them.
Questions for Karan? And could you again use the microphone, please?
Yolanda Comedy with the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So my question is about framing the problem or the issue or how we look at diversity, because it seems as we started with it was important socially. It was a social justice issue. Now we're kind of at the world is changing, so we need to be more fair. Somehow it doesn't seem to me that we quite capture that we haven't really done a good job of framing what the issue is, and that's why we have a lot of trouble getting buy-in. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and if I had the answer, I'd have published it and wouldn't have come to this conference to learn from everybody else, what is it? But I think you're right on. We have not framed the issue to create the right sense of urgency. Because my College of Engineering is not having trouble getting enrollment. The graduates are not having trouble getting jobs. Corporations are coming. Some corporations tell us this or that is important, but they still interview our students and hire them. I'm not sure that the sense of urgency we need can be created by just a few universities or a few organizations that are focused on it, but I think we are the catalysts that have to make and unite some other groups, and that's why ASCE and NAE are so important in this, is we have to catalyze other groups to make sure we're hitting that message, because it is about social justice. It is about what is American. If you live in the state of Texas, this is a framing that might not work in the entire universe. It's hard to imagine that you can't frame everything like Texas frames it, but that it is unpatriotic for Texas A&M to not be diverse. Oh my gosh, would people look at me like I'm an idiot? But I can explain why I believe that to be true. And I can potentially get some people who are not listening to me about social justice or fairness or stuff like that to pay attention to me. So I'm not sure it's a single framing, but I think we haven't worked hard enough. Lots of people have worked very hard on it, but we haven't worked to get the right framing that's going to cause a tipping. Have you read Gladwell's tipping point, and stuff like that? We haven't tipped it. It's not sticky enough. It's not contagious enough how we framed it yet. So we got to keep working on that. I think that's why they pulled us together. Yes, sir.
Seems to me that maybe there's two organizations that haven't been talked about much in this conference in regards to this. One, of course, is community colleges. We're invisible. But the other is ABET. Is there any chance that ABET would take on the sense of patriotism in reviewing programs?
So ABET's criteria is driven by the professional societies. ABET is not this entity that sits by itself and writes the criteria. So if IEEE, ASME, AICHE, if they don't think this is important, ABET, by its own rules, can't turn it into a criteria. Now, has ABET done enough to push those societies to think about it? No. Is ABET starting to do enough? Starting. Examples, WEPAN and SWE were never member societies of ABET till last year. NMEPA just came in as a member society, excuse me, not NMEPA, NACME, as a member society of ABET. So ABET changed its rules about who can be a member society specifically to get some of these broad entities more engaged in us. And our strategy is that's going to help us in the discussions with the other societies to make it part of the daily conversations. So we're working on it, but we're not there. Tonya.
So I am really resonating with the idea that you talked about forming alliances, because I think there's some models out there in mathematics where there are schools that have formed mentoring alliances and done that. And to me, that it seems like that's a strategy if you have people on your campus that are the willing, and we had that discussion about bringing along the willing. What are your thoughts on how to form those alliances so that you can maybe avoid or get around some of the institutional barriers? Do they work in Texas, or do you see them in other places?
So I'm going to give you an example. I hope it's what you're talking about. It's a little different, but an example, and it's going to involve community colleges. So step by step, one of the things we did is we said that students who are co-enrolled in Texas A&M University and a community college can get financial aid. You know, there's a problem. You have to qualify with a certain number of hours to get financial aid. And when students are co-enrolled in two places, they usually, unless the two places have an agreement, the federal government doesn't recognize 6 hours here and 6 hours here as full-time enrollment. But if you get an agreement, you can do this for the students. So we did that. And then what we did for one of the local community colleges, and then what we did is we said, so now Texas A&M that has way too many applicants is going to work with the community college, and we're going to have some set of our incoming freshmen. This year it's about 1,100 of our admitted freshmen are admitted to the community college simultaneously. These are the students where we know from our best prediction they're going to be better served by the community colleges than being in our math department or our poli-sci, for that matter. And so they take 3 to 5 hours at Texas A&M, and they take the remaining hours they need to be a full-time student. They're guaranteed that if they graduate, if they go for 2 years there, even if they don't get the associate degree, but we prefer them to get it, and have a 2.5, they get into A&M. We don't promise them they get their major, but we promise they get into A&M. Okay, all that's fine. But the alliance came this last year because the colleges were not paying any attention to these 1,100 kids. And this last year, we went to engineering and we said, pay attention to the 200 kids that are sitting over there that said they want engineering. So they went and they made some clustered learning communities, because what the community college was having trouble with is nobody will take classes Friday afternoon. So they had enough room to do the science labs, but they couldn't get the students to take the section when they need it. So we said what we'll do is we'll make this cluster that engineering wannabes have to apply for, and the lab will be Friday afternoon. And we will send some of our graduate assistants over to help mentor and tutor the students that are in this alliance. So instead of getting 40% of those students last year in their second year to still want to be engineering, we have 85%. But it's that alliance of not just solving our problem that in 2 years we want them to come here, but figuring out what was creating a problem for the community college having these students. And they teach the students as well as we do in these classes. So I think whether it is, in a subject matter alliance, in a special field alliance or something like that, it's really important for us to figure out how we can learn from and help each other. I mean, it's a big deal for our math department for us to go to them and say, you're not going to be able to teach these students as well as the community college will. Because they, of course, think they can teach anybody anyway all the time. And you're like, no, they're not going to do well in a 110 student calculus class. So we're going to take them to community college where the classes are never bigger than 30. We've worked with what they are teaching them and how we're going to articulate it and stuff like that. And we can prove to you with data that those students actually, for their incoming credentials, do better in the follow-on courses than how they're doing through yours. So we have to get them to the table and understand you don't just get to self-proclaim greatness, which is very non-Texan.
Good morning, Liz Boylan from the Sloan Foundation. I preface this by saying I'm an interloper here. I'm a developmental biologist among all of you engineers, and it's been wonderfully illuminating. Since I've been at Sloan a little over 2 years now, I really have been interested in looking at schools of engineering and actually the engineering professions, the disciplinary variety among the engineering subdisciplines as a problem, but also an opportunity. The problem is the distribution of women and minorities across these engineering subdisciplines is very varied. But I see, I want to challenge those of you who are in this to think about how either by benchmarking, as Karen was saying, as she's doing with all of the schools, how the profession, how NAE or NASE and the rest of you can celebrate where there have been achievements within the disciplinary societies. What are those best practices? What are the barriers among the other subdisciplines? And shine perhaps light and challenge the ones that have not changed. So I say again, this is as an outsider, but I think that there are some really wonderful opportunities using the strategies that you were saying. You first have to have the data; it has to be collected. People have to own it, and then there has to be some incentives to actually promote and sustain that change. So. We at the Sloan Foundation are interested in engineering and technology. It's part of our mission and Mr. Sloan's commitment. So I hope that those of you who are interested in looking at this within engineering and the diversity among engineering will come and talk to me.
And by the way, just as an example, in my field, electrical engineering, I'm pretty sure we're all the way to 16 or 17% women right now. Worked really hard for the last 35 years, gotten all the way to where physics was 35 years ago. It's quite a phenomenal progress that we have made. And of course, when we ask, well, how come biomedical engineering has 50% and chemical engineering has 38%? And why is it that electrical? Well, it's always physics' fault, of course, math and physics, but mostly physics' fault is why mechanical and electrical are so bad. But then we asked our guys, well, how come in our campus in Doha, Kotter, where women are oppressed, according to all of your mindsets, it's 42% women enrollment in electrical engineering? Don't they do physics too? Are they doing physics better over there? I mean, what is the difference? And they're having this conversation. Of course, remember, mistakes were made, but not by them, okay? It is society's fault, because in Doha, being an engineer is considered a valuable contribution to society. Well, even if that's the best my guys can come up with, it's better than it's physics' fault. But we got to keep working on them on what could they do that's different. Thank you very much.
Join me in thanking Karen.